There was a man you probably knew, not famous, not loud, but the kind of man whose presence rearranged the room the moment he walked in, not because he demanded it, but because something in him made the air feel more serious, more real. He spoke less than the others, but when he did, people leaned in. He carried himself with the particular stillness of someone who had already survived whatever he was asked about. No performance, no pitch, just a quality of presence that was becoming increasingly rare, the kind that made you feel, without knowing why, that this man had been tested and had not broken. He was not the wealthiest in the room. He was not always the most decorated, but he was consistent, grounded, the kind of man who returned calls when he said he would, who built things slowly and built them to last, who had no interest in appearing to be what he already was. He did not chase status, but status seemed to recognize him anyway. He had that gravity, that quiet authority, the type of man who had earned his calm. And then, one day, he was gone. Not dead, not defeated, not destroyed by scandal or broken by failure. He simply withdrew, stepped back from the noise, from the visibility, from the social stage where he had once been a quiet fixture. His phone went unanswered more often. His presence in the usual places thinned, then disappeared entirely. The group chats continued without him. The professional circles he had orbited noticed a gap but could not name exactly when it had formed. He had not made an announcement. He had not staged a dramatic exit. He had not explained himself to anyone. He had simply stopped showing up. And the world, as the world always does, began to fill the silence with assumptions. He must have burned out. He must have lost something, a relationship, a deal, a sense of purpose. Some people murmured that he had never been quite as strong as he seemed. Others imagined collapse behind closed doors. Failure wrapped in quiet. A man retreating because he had run out of something essential. But they were wrong. He did not disappear because he lost. He disappeared because he understood. And that distinction between retreat as defeat and retreat as clarity is the one that almost no one is willing to sit with long enough to see clearly. This is not a story about one man. This is a pattern, a quiet, spreading, deliberate pattern, visible now across cities, industries, social circles, and online spaces that are slowly going darker. High-value men, men of discipline, depth, and accumulated strength, are choosing, with increasing intention, to become invisible, not because the world broke them, not because they have given up, but because they have made a different calculation than the one the world expected. And that calculation, once made, is almost never reversed. The first thing people assume when a capable man withdraws is that something is wrong with him, that he is hurt, that he has been rejected, and the silence is his way of licking wounds that are too deep to show, or that he is fragile in some hidden way that his composure had been masking. This assumption is almost always wrong. The men who go quiet, who remove themselves from the performance, who stop being easily reachable and casually available, most of them are not broken. They are selective, and there is an enormous difference between those two things, even if they look identical from the outside. A broken man withdraws because he has nothing left. A selective man withdraws because he has decided that what he has is too valuable to keep offering without return. The broken man disappears into chaos, into numbness, into the slow erosion of someone who has stopped believing in himself. The selective man disappears into focus, into construction, into the quiet work of a life that no longer requires an audience to feel legitimate. What people interpret as damage is often discernment made visible. These men have developed, through years of experience and repeated observation, a finely calibrated sensitivity to where their energy is respected and where it is merely consumed. They have sat at enough tables to know which ones are worth sitting at. They have had enough conversations to recognize, quickly and without much drama, when a conversation is feeding something real, and when it is only feeding the other person's need for their attention. At some point, they stopped pretending that the difference did not matter. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes not from overwork, but from oversupply. from being reliably present in spaces that have stopped being worthy of that presence, from maintaining warmth toward people who treat that warmth as a resource rather than a gift. These men are not tired of life. They are tired of a specific, low quality version of life that the social world kept asking them to keep performing. Some men do not leave because they failed the world. They leave because the world failed their standards. Before we go any further, it is worth being honest about what constant visibility actually costs. Because the modern world has done an extraordinary job of making availability feel like virtue, invisibility feel like relevance. And the pressure to perform that visibility has become so ambient, so woven into the texture of daily life, that most men carry it without ever naming it as a burden. But it is a burden, a significant one. To be always reachable is to be always interruptible. To have your attention constantly available to others is to have your deepest focus constantly at risk. Every notification is a small tax on the ability to think clearly. Every platform that expects regular content is a quiet contract. Produce or become invisible, perform or be forgotten, stay loud or lose your place. The economics of modern visibility are brutal, and they are especially brutal for men who have something real to protect. There is the pressure of social media performance, the expectation that a man of value will share his life, his wins, his process, his opinions, that he will make his interior world into content and distribute it freely to an audience that is largely indifferent and occasionally hostile. There is the status competition that never ends. The digital scoreboard that refreshes constantly and always makes someone else seem to be winning something. There is the emotional overexposure that comes from existing in comment sections and group chats and networking events where depth is not possible, and yet authenticity is somehow expected. And there is the noise, the endless, unrelenting, texturally suffocating noise of a world that has confused volume with value, that mistakes loudness for leadership, that treats a man's silence as an invitation to fill it with other people's voices. The men who understand all of this truly understand it, not as a vague complaint, but as a precise analysis, begin to see visibility not as status, but as expenditure. Attention, they realize, is a finite resource, and they have been spending it carelessly in places that gave them nothing back, so they stop, not with anger, not with bitterness, simply with the calm efficiency of someone who has audited their life and decided to stop funding what does not grow. There is a counterintuitive truth about high competence, one that only becomes visible over time. The more real a man's ability becomes, the quieter he tends to get about it. Watch the men who are genuinely capable in any field, the ones who have moved past the early stages of proving themselves, past the hunger for recognition that drives so much of what passes for ambition in the noisy public sphere. Most of them have become, by degree, more silent, not colder, not more distant in any meaningful human sense, but quieter, more economical, less interested in the demonstration of what they know, and more focused on the application of it. This is not accidental, it is structural. Competence, real competence, no longer needs applause to feel legitimate. A man who genuinely knows what he is doing does not need to explain himself constantly, because the work speaks in a register that is louder than explanation. Strength, when it has matured, becomes efficient rather than expressive. It stops wasting energy on the performance of itself. Wisdom, accumulated through enough hard experience, stops arguing with people who are not yet capable of receiving it. And confidence, not the brittle, performed kind, but the deep structural kind, stops advertising itself entirely, because it has nothing left to prove. What remains, then, is a man who seems quiet to those who measure value by volume, a man who seems cold to those who mistake his restraint for absence of feeling, a man who seems to be doing nothing when in fact he is doing everything, just without announcing it. The men making the most noise online are very often the men building the least. Noise is, in many cases, the language of emptiness. It fills the space where substance has not yet arrived. The truly capable understand this intuitively. and they stop contributing to a conversation that has never really been about anything other than the sound of itself. The definition of luxury is shifting. It is shifting quietly, without a marketing campaign, without a trend report, without a cultural moment that anyone can point to as the turning point. But it is shifting. And the men who have gone off grid understand it better than almost anyone else currently does. For a long time, luxury meant acquisition: the car, the watch, the table at the right restaurant, the apartment with the right view, the visible markers of material success that communicated to anyone watching that a man had arrived somewhere worth arriving. There was a logic to that system, not an admirable logic, perhaps, but a consistent one. Status required proof. Proof required display. Display required the presence of witnesses. That logic is collapsing. Not for all men, not even for most men, but for the ones who have accumulated enough experience, enough perspective, enough of the actual thing that all that display was supposed to represent. For those men, the calculus has changed entirely. What they want now is not more. What they want is less, but of a different kind: freedom from interruption, control over how their time is spent and by whom, and in service of what. Emotional peace, the profound, almost physical luxury of not having to manage other people's perceptions of you. Private growth that has no audience and requires none. Relationships that have no spectators, no gallery, no performance element. A life whose value does not depend on being witnessed. These men have come to see privacy not as the absence of something, but as the presence of something rare, a form of capital, perhaps the most important form, that the visible world keeps spending without ever noticing it is gone. The man who controls his time, his attention, his emotional environment, and his inner life is wealthier in the ways that actually compound than almost any man with a larger number in his bank account. What the world calls isolation, he may call wealth, and he is not wrong. Let us be precise about something, because this is the place where the story is most often misread. This man does not hate the world. He does not hate women. He does not hate society or success or human connection. He is not living out of resentment. He is not building his invisible life on the foundation of some wound that he refuses to name. That interpretation is available. Many people will reach for it because it is simpler than the truth. It turns his clarity into pathology, his choices into symptoms. It is wrong. What he has quit is not the world. What he has quit is the performance. He has quit the fake networking, the events and dinners, and online threads where people are not actually connecting, but are instead auditioning for each other, where relationships are formed and maintained based entirely on what can be extracted rather than what can be shared. He has quit the shallow validation, the thumbs-up economy of approval that he once, perhaps without fully knowing it, organized small corners of his behavior around. He has quit the transactional attention, the version of visibility where being seen was always, underneath, about being useful to someone who was never going to reciprocate, and he has quit identity theater, the exhausting, continuous project of maintaining a public self that is legible and appealing and properly marketed to an audience that does not know him and largely does not want to. He was never that person, but he had been performing that person in ways large and small for longer than he wants to admit. What he is living now is more real than anything that came before. It is quieter, yes. Less visible, absolutely. But the realness of it, the solidity, the coherence between who he is and how he lives, is something he had not known he was missing until he finally stopped pretending he had it. The life he lives now is hard to photograph and harder to explain. It does not translate well into content. It has no natural highlight reel, but it is full in a way that the visible life never quite managed to be. He wakes early, before the world makes its demands, and the early morning hours belong entirely to him. This is not a productivity ritual performed for an audience. It is simply the first act of a day that he has decided to own completely. His routines are not impressive from the outside. They are disciplined, repetitive, Unglamorous, he trains his body with the same quiet seriousness that he brings to everything else, not for aesthetics, not for anyone's approval, but because physical strength is a form of clarity that he has learned to depend on. He eats with intention. He sleeps enough. He has removed from his daily environment almost everything that used to drain him without his noticing. And what remains is a schedule that feels, for the first time, genuinely his. The work he does now has depth. He's not producing for volume. He's not optimizing for visibility. He's building something that will matter in 5 years, or 10, or 20, and he has the patience to do it right, because he is no longer spending half his energy managing the perception of what he is doing. His circle is small. This is not a failure of likability. It is a deliberate architecture. There are a handful of people who know him fully, and those relationships have a quality of trust and substance that he had never found in the wider social world, however populated that world had been. These people do not need him to perform. He does not need to perform for them. The conversations are honest, which makes them rare, which makes them valuable beyond what he can easily articulate. Fewer people see him now. Many of those who do not see him imagine him badly, but he has never been more stable, more coherent, more fully himself. He knows this, and that knowledge is enough. This is not a story that ends with one man. It is a story that is only beginning. Because the conditions that produced him, the noise, the performance economy, the exhausting cost of constant visibility, the mismatch between what the world rewards and what actually constitutes a life worth living, those conditions are not going away. If anything, they are intensifying. The digital environment is louder than it was 5 years ago, and it will be louder still in 5 more. The pressure to perform identity, to monetize presence, to compete for attention in spaces that were never designed for depth, all of it is accelerating, and a growing number of men who are paying attention are reaching the same conclusions. Through their own experience, by their own roots, without coordination or manifesto, they are noticing that visibility does not equal value, that popularity is not the same thing as respect, that access, being reachable, being available, being easy to find, is not the same thing as connection, that the noise they have been making or tolerating or navigating does not equal meaning. These men will follow the same road, not out of anger, not as protest, not in reaction to any particular wound, but out of something colder and more durable than emotion. Clarity, the simple, precise recognition that a different life is available, and that the only price of that life is the willingness to stop paying for the one that was never quite working. The trend will grow quietly, as it must, as it should. You will not see it trending. You will simply notice, after some time, that certain kinds of men are harder to reach than they used to be, that certain presences have thinned, and by the time you notice, many of them will have already been gone for longer than you realized. And then the question that always comes, will he return? Maybe, but not in the way the question imagines. He will not return to reclaim his place in the old architecture. He will not come back louder, having learned that visibility was the answer after all. He will not return hungry for the validation he once pretended not to need. That version of him, the one that was available by default, reachable without effort, present in spaces that had not earned his presence, that version is not coming back. If he returns, it will be on different terms entirely. He will appear where there is substance. He will invest where there is genuine reciprocity. He will be present only in the specific places where presence means something, where depth is possible, where he does not need to compress himself to fit. He will not be easy to reach, because he has decided that ease of access was never a virtue, and is certainly not one now. He will return, perhaps, to the people who deserve it, to the work that calls for it, to the moments that are real enough to justify stepping, briefly, back into the visible world. But he will be different, denser, more certain, less impressionable. And when he leaves again, as he likely will, it will be with the same calm, the same absence of drama, the same clean exit that puzzled everyone the first time. The world sees a man go quiet and calls it loss. It sees the absence and reaches immediately for the narrative of ruin, because ruin is legible, and legible things are comfortable, and comfortable explanations do not require the world to examine itself. But some absences are not losses. Some withdrawals are not collapses. Some silences contain more than all the noise that surrounded them. There are men who have disappeared not because they ran out of something, but because they finally found something worth protecting. Not from the world, exactly, but from the version of the world that was slowly, persistently, asking them to be less than they actually were. They have stepped back from the theater not because they lost the role, but because they finally read the whole script and decided the story wasn't worth telling. They are not gone, they are present, more fully, more precisely present than they have ever been in the lives they have chosen rather than inherited, in the mornings that belong entirely to them, in the work that no one is watching but that is becoming, quietly, something real, in the relationships that have survived precisely because they were never performed for an audience. The disappearance, seen clearly, is not a disappearance at all. It is an arrival, the most private, the least celebrated, the most consequential kind of arrival, the moment when a man stops building a life for other people's approval and starts building one for his own. And perhaps that is the question worth sitting with, long after this ends. Not where these men went, not what broke them, because nothing broke them, but this: if someone you knew went quiet, truly quiet, stepped back from all the noise and the visibility and the performance, did he disappear? Or did he, finally, come home?